Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday, the 6th of June, and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. So it's the first full week of showrooms being reopened in England. And you and I have had a bit of a busy week, haven't we, on the podcast front?
Yeah. I mean, quite, time-wise, not taking up too much time, but actually, it's just great interview on Monday, first thing in the morning with Daksh ahead of one or two others. So I think we beat Sky News and one or two others, I think.
We beat Sky News and ITV News, so we did well there.
So I mean, great interview there with Daksh. I mean, it is at the end of today's podcast, so you can stay on after the headlines this morning and continue and listen to the interview with Daksh there, sharing some of his thoughts on the showroom shutdown, the reopening of his businesses, and where he sees the future for retailers as we sort of move through the recovery out of COVID-19. But that was a good interview there, and then we had another one, didn't we, with on Thursday of this week as well. So 2 in the week.
Yeah, we did. That was with Grant Thornton's Owen Edwards. And last week, or was it only this week? I mean, the weeks are merging. But Owen posted this blog on LinkedIn, and it was identifying 3 key strategies for dealers to improve their business viability, and it generated a lot of interest. So the interview was really on the back of that. So he does flesh out those 3 strategies. So that's definitely worth a listen.
Yeah. Head over to the motortraderadio.com or one of the other podcast platforms with Spotify and Google and iTunes, and you can tune into that with Owen. But it's very, very poignant for dealers, particularly as they reopen and start to put together their sort of strategies and cash flow plans for the short term ahead, aren't they? So it's really poignant for them to tune in and listen to that one.
Yeah, definitely. And we were quizzing him on consolidation, his views on consolidation, which ties in with a couple of stories that we'll be covering today as well.
And have we got some stories? I mean, this week has been a week of headlines, hasn't it? I mean, the showrooms reopened on the 1st of June, as we know. Businesses are now sort of either open or planning to open, as the next sort of deadline is the 15th of June, the next imminent deadline for some businesses looking to open. But it has spurred on a lot of activity, particularly around the automotive sector in recent days.
Yeah, it was a struggle compiling this week's headlines. What we're running is virtually half of what we potentially could have done, but we would have gone on for hours. So headlines this week, we'll start with a look at the May new car registrations, also take a look at how Europe panned out over the course of April. Lookers to cut 1,500 jobs and close 12 more sites. Virtue have released their full year results, which crucially is to the end of February, so it was before the lockdown period, but they're also talking about some current trading and future expectations. Brayley's has expanded its Honda representation. We've got the latest on used car prices, and the and finally this week is quite an interesting one. It's a close look at the Dyson EV that never was.
Yeah. Definitely, and some good information in there when we will say that you head over to that one when you do get to it, but some detailed information of the vehicle that never happened, but some of the plans that were in. I suppose it sort of gives you a little bit of insight of what could be coming when someone like Dyson does move forward with that kind of plan. So definitely worth waiting for. So our first headline of this show is obviously on the back of the May registrations being published, and we're starting off with a story on AM Online, and almost 13,000 new cars reached private buyers in May's COVID-19 lockdown. So they have focused on the percentage of the result that turned out at 20,247, which closed at 89% down on the performance for 2019. But they said they focused on the private registrations that finished just short of 13,000 at 12,900 were registered to private buyers, according to the data from the SMMT.
Yeah, it's actually quite a good positive take on what is a story about the market being down 89%. So within that, looking at some of the movements there, it's if you look at the list for the whole of the month for May and year to date, every brand is minus. And, in previous months, we've talked about sort of highlighting the ups and downs. Well, they're all downs. Yeah. And interestingly, once again, the top selling car in the UK for the month was the Tesla 3, which that was on the back of 852 registrations.
Yeah, and like you say, majority of the manufacturers were, well, all the manufacturers were down.
They were all down, yeah.
The majority, they were all down. But, you look at people like Audi, who registered 1,500, Ford, 2,111, Kia, 1,018, Mercedes-Benz, just over 2,000 at 2,002, Peugeot, 1,040, VW 1197 and Volvo 1167. So one or two in the scale of the result of 20,247, not bad results by one or two of them there, as in the scheme of things as a result. But I think the next story we talk about, obviously some results across the European market, and it'll put some of this in context as to what's been happening across Europe. But again, bearing in mind we are in lockdown, we went in lockdown later than our European partners. European partners, or can we class them as European partners anymore?
Well, up until the end of the year, I guess we can.
Yeah, true, very true. So, I think we did go into it later. So we've been in a stiffer lockdown through the month of May. So, I don't think we did expect a huge result for May performance, but again, down 89%, which actually for the 2 months combined of April and May, that leaves us down about 300,000 units between the 2 months compared to the same period last year. So when we were talking to Owen this week from Grant Thornton, when we were trying to talk around that new car forecast and used car forecast, you kind of understand when we were talking about the challenge that's facing for the remainder of the year, because there's a large deficit there of 300,000 units between April and May to catch up, plus facing some of the potential supply challenges as the manufacturers start up again, but obviously in a less efficient, productive manner.
Yeah, and it's worth just pointing out that battery electric vehicles, so pure plug-ins, they actually increased up. They were up 21.5% for the month, and obviously petrol and diesel were both down. But those BEVs have been on the rise now for a number of months.
And I think you've got some LCV numbers, haven't you, just to share with the listeners?
Yeah, so May registrations for LCVs were down 74.1%. So that was slightly better than April. Year to date is down 49.6% to 78,835 units. And the SMMT pointed out that the majority of registrations for LCVs during the month was really driven by fleet orders for key worker industries.
Yeah, so again, this LCV has been in the used car market through wholesale. I mean, LCV was the fastest starter. I mean, the demand there for LCV was very positive and performing very well. So again, we may see a better performance, quicker recovery for LCV than we do cars, possibly for the remainder of the year. So definitely an area to watch.
Yeah, I was reading some highly speculative piece, and I can't remember where it was, but it was sort of indicating that maybe some people in the hospitality sector who don't envisage going back to work in the short, medium or long term are actually buying vans and doing deliveries, because that is where a lot of the business is at the moment.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stimulus now in that home delivery, isn't there? And we talk about learnings from this lockdown, and that may be the area that is accelerated in terms of that home deliveries via takeaways, shopping, whatever goods are delivered, but a large increase there, which then does require vans to be able to do that. So again, potential good opportunity there. So moving on to our next story, and we're heading over to This Is Money, who have published the figures by JATO, and they, again, as you do get with This Is Money, you get a fairly robust headliner. So can all car manufacturers recover from coronavirus? Sales across Europe plunged to the lowest level since the 1970s. Rob Hull looks at the signs. Looks at signs, demand, and markets are already starting to bounce back. Now, this is the full results from April, because delay, you do get the delay from getting the full European figures as quickly as we do get our obviously on UK ones. But he's looking at some of the impact of April through COVID-19 on the manufacturers across the European countries on this one.
Yeah, and as you say, the figures show that Europe was down 78% for the month. So that was a drop of it was around 1 million units. But interestingly, in the piece, it does actually point out that the markets that were least impacted were the Scandinavian markets, where restrictions on movements during their lockdown was more relaxed than in other markets and other countries, and certainly the UK. So in terms of the best performing markets, you've got Norway, which was down 34%, Denmark down 37%, Sweden also down 37%, and Finland down 39%. And then you start to have a sizable jump as the other markets were down progressively more, with unfortunately the UK and Italy being the biggest market drops of both of 97% for April.
Yeah, and I've got sight of the some of the May, not all of them, but again, you mentioned Italy down there in Spain that are around the UK. So we know that the UK dropped 97% in April, and we've just talked around the 89% for the month of May. Italy there, I think, looking at the figures, they were again 97% in the month of April, but actually in May they dropped just short of 50% at 49.6. So they finished on just short of 100,000 registrations in April. So a large jump there for Italy.
Yeah,
4,400 in the month of April to 100,000 in the month of May.
That is interesting, isn't it? Because they did come out of lockdown, or lockdown was eased a lot earlier than in the UK, so that they have bounced back as a result of that.
And similar to Spain. Again, just ahead of us in April at 96% down with 4,300 registrations. They finished the month of May 72.7% down. But that was with 59,900 registrations. So again, another European country that came out of lockdown earlier than we have, showing signs of recovery, although still significant year-on-year decline. But in terms of volume output, that's a significant change there. And I've got a couple of others. Germany in April we're down 61%, down to 122,886. And in the month of May, they were down 49.5%, and that was 168,100. So not a huge jump for Germany compared to the percentage shifts for both Italy and Spain. Still a significant number ahead of the UK, but in terms of that movement, it's not quite as big. The US was down 30% in the month of May, with 1.1 million registrations taking place. And interestingly, I mean, you mentioned some of those sort of smaller countries. Norway in the month of May, 39% down with 8,000 registrations, and Denmark was down 40.1% with 11,400 registrations. So again, compared to Italy, Spain, France, Germany, who have seen significant signs of recovery, UK a little bit later there with the restriction lift scenario.
Yeah. So next story is from AM, and the headline is Lookers to axe up to 1,500 jobs and close 12 more car dealerships. So it worth giving a bit of context to this story because, before the lockdown, before COVID, Lookers were they were having problems, and they just well publicised that there was a FCA investigation into the business, which is actually still underway, and there's an ongoing internal fraud investigation. So, Lookers has been looking long and hard about how it's sort of going to reposition itself, and it's talked about a portfolio consolidation plan, and that will see the closure of 15 locations.
Yeah, I mean, they've been through a torrid time, haven't they? I mean, I know the FCA I think it's still the case that they've suspended investigations, not just at Lookers, but in general, currently through the lockdown. It's just, I mean, that a business like this should recover in time, but I think it's just going to be a case of, as you say there, it's just, I mean, could the timing been worse? For what they were going through, as you said, put it in context there. This was pre-COVID-19, this was pre-lockdown that this started, and then they've obviously got the lockdown in addition to this, as many other every other business has had the same challenges through lockdown and the impact of COVID. But it's just a shame because 12 immediate shutdowns of operations there, further ones planned, and the redundancies as well on top of that, and we still haven't had the final results for the full year trading following the investigation. So just a challenging time for those guys over at Lookers at the minute.
It is, and this is also on the back of recently reported stories and confirmed about a possible merger talks with Pendragon that didn't actually go anywhere. So Lookers is finding its feet at the moment, and within the story there are sort of lengthy quotes from Mark Raban, the chief exec there, who's actually saying, we are having to reflect on the outlook for the group and how we must adapt to ensure a positive future in what is likely to remain an uncertain economic and industry environment.
Yeah, definitely. So one that we're going to be talking about for some time, I suspect. So we'll keep you up to date with that one as information transpires as we get it. So moving on, heading over to auto retail agenda there, and we've obviously had Robert Forrester on the podcast, and he's been pretty prolific in this lockdown in the media with his on TV, BBC, breakfast news interview and things like this. But this week their figures were released, their full year results, and some positive results there in the release there.
Yeah, so the group's latest full years, and as we said at the top of the show, these go up to the end of February. So profit before tax was 23.5 million against 23.7 million last year. And the profits come on the back of revenue, which was up 2.8% to £3.06 billion. Like-for-like revenues were up 1.2%, and it's worth pointing out that over the course of the year, the group added 12 sites, and that included three new franchise partners.
Yeah, and he's fairly open in their plans. I mean, they have sort of cited that there is acquisition on the horizon, that they're in a fairly strong position to take advantage of opportunities as they appear. They do talk about cash flow performance as being the focus for the group during lockdown, and that the board are delighted with the progress made in collecting receivables, delivering stock, and controlling costs, obviously throughout this period. So again, they've been fairly active, particularly in that sort of van sector and the aftermarket for the key workers during lockdown, and fairly swift out the blocks, ready for the first of June opening. But again, as we talked about with the interview with Owen there, that potentially that there is opportunities there as they move forward.
Yeah, and just to give you a clue, this is a direct quote from the story. As a well-managed group with strong culture, brands and systems, the group has the ambition to grow in scale as the sector consolidates as a result of the acceleration of numerous trends. So, watch this space.
Again, it's going to be interesting in it that, what opportunities present themselves and whether there are strategic investments through those opportunities as a consequence of COVID-19. So again, we're starting to see a lot of this now, aren't we? I mean, for 2 weeks on the podcast now, we've talked around acquisitions and things like this, and moving on to the next story is another movement within the market over at motortrader.com, and this is where Brayley's buys Romford Honda from Glyn Hopkins. And this is an interesting one, because you mentioned it as we were sort of talking before the show, that this is from his backyard. This is their home area, isn't it, for Glyn Hopkins?
Yeah, they're based in Romford, so it is curious. I mean, obviously they've made a strategic decision there, and they do still retain Honda sites in Chelmsford and Colchester in Essex. But this acquisition by Brayley's grows their representation to 8 Honda sites, and they also represent Kia, Mazda, Renault and Dacia. So they've actually operating now across 15 sales points, but they did start as a soulless Honda business, and Paul Brayley has done a tremendous job there, growing the business in terms of scale, representation, and it's only we reported on this at the time, but in 2018 Brayley sold a majority shareholding to the Dubai-based AW Rostamani Group, and we were saying at the time that this would lead to acquisitions, because it was made quite clear that the investment saw the group growing in scale. So this is one of those acquisitions.
Yeah, and again, sort of highlights where we may see some of this streamlining of manufacturer partners between groups, and acquisitions start to take place, and movements of territories. So I suspect that we are going to be talking about this kind of thing in the short term, aren't we, on some of these the weekly podcasts, but one that again we'll start to watch more closely.
Yes, so you're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group, the only weekly podcast serving the car retailing sector, and available online at motortraderadio.com and by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Deezer and SoundCloud.
And moving over to motortrader.com there. So with the next headline, actually, it's from me, isn't it, Curtis?
It is. It's one of yours. It's one of yours. Shall I set it up for you?
You can do, yeah. Yes.
Here we go. So Motor Trader. So the headline is dealers to hold firm on used car prices as showrooms reopen. So this is a rather timely dealer sentiment survey that you guys have carried out, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it was really, there's a lot of conversation taking place around vehicle values, what the market are going to do in terms of that retail and wholesale pricing. And if you've missed any of that in the media throughout lockdown, then where have you been? There's a lot of conversation, a lot of opinion taking place as to what will happen in both the retail space and the wholesale space. But what the survey does highlight, and it's really focused at the dealer market, both independents and franchise dealers, is that they're not, the majority of the respondents are not going to panic in pricing, in their retail pricing initially. They're going to hold firm. They've either made a decision that their prices will stay steady, of which Cap HPI and Auto Trader and others have been talking about that. And Motors, eBay Motor Group as well, been talking about very minimal movement in that retail pricing space during lockdown. But it was a case of what will happen post 1st of June as the dealers are open again, and majority of them are going to hold firm, or they're going to watch the market. So we've always talked about whether there's going to be fire sales and panic taking place, but I think because this is a freeze essentially on the industry from the 23rd of March, and not what we experienced back in 2007, 2008, 2009 period, that many have thought, well, that car is still worth what it's worth as a retail proposition, and will hold firm. And potentially stock could get hard to get hold of because of the consequences of new, as we've just been talking about with what's happening in the new car market. So it's a positive message that the retailers are going to hold firm on their pricing.
Yeah, and the actual stats are 54% of those surveys said they'll actually hold firm on prices, while a third say they're waiting for the market's data before deciding. Because that's actually been a crucial point, hasn't it? Because there's been a lack of volume to actually base the data on, but that's starting to come through now.
It is, and I think there's a message out there that really, nobody's been through anything like this before. It's new to everybody, and the dealers need income. They will need revenue, and they'll need as much as possible, as soon as possible, to get that cash flow moving. Nobody wants to accelerate depreciation in the market. Consumers, why would that Audi A3, for example, on the 23rd of March be worth any less to a consumer on the 1st of June? There's a view that that's the case. Now, within some of this, you are going to get where people need to get rid of stock, reduce stock levels, and get cash into the business. But as a majority, and that's the key with this, that it's the majority of the market are going to hold firm, which is good news. And I think that's where, it makes it clear that they're not going to start panic selling and panic pricing to clear stock in the short term. But again, it's moving at the minute. Everything's one that we are watching very, very closely as we move through time.
So next story is from BBC News, and it's written by their business editor, Simon Jack. And the headline is Nissan, UK factory still under threat from no-deal Brexit. And this is a story that you could be forgiven for thinking had gone away, because only last week or the week before we were saying that things were looking good for Nissan, the plant in Sunderland, because Nissan Nissan had made the decision to close its factory in Spain, and there were also reports that Renault would be moving production of 2 of its vehicles into Sunderland to fill the capacity. But this story is actually based on an interview that Simon Jack did with Ashwani Gupta, who's the global boss of Nissan, and he's pointed out that if the 10% tariffs are added to vehicles as a result of Brexit, and this is under the World Trade Organization rules, he's saying that it would present an unsustainable business model for Nissan in the UK, because 70% of its cars, and these are models like the Duke and Qashqai, and I think the Leaf is still produced in Sunderland. 70% of cars are exported into Europe. So it's worth actually just having a look at that story, because it's only a very short interview with Ashwani Gupta, but he gives a reasoned argument as to why it would become unsustainable.
Yeah, and as you say, I mean, it is a fairly short interview, but very on point from Ashwani there, isn't it? I mean, he's very clear in his message that, it is kind of the elephant in the room, isn't it? That the Brexit, the pending Brexit, and the tariff implications that comes from that, following what the UK and the global automotive sector have been through in the last, I think we're heading into our 12th week of this, but very clear that the tariffs will make them review their strategy for the UK investment, due to, as you say there, Curtis, 70% of those vehicles manufactured in Sunderland are then sold within the UK, which then the tariff becomes a very significant play with that. And it's very interesting, because we were talking before the show about the Renault Nissan and the conversations around that, and it's kind of taken a bit of a reverse on that. On this.
Yeah, I must admit, when we were talking about this 2 weeks ago, the thought of the French allowing Renaults to be made in the UK, I mean, it was a bit of a stretch. And, I think since then, President Macron has urged Renault to sort of focus on France. And, if you want state aid, then you need to manufacture in France. And, only last week, I think we were reporting that Renault's laying off, I think it was something like 15,000 workers. So, there's huge pressure on Renault to retain all production in France.
Yeah, and interestingly, I mean, connected to this story, and it has just broke yesterday morning on Car Dealer magazine, and kind of links to this slightly. I mean, the header is Car Dealer, Inchcape and manufacturer Nissan tap up the government for millions in emergency loans, and I wouldn't expect any less of a headline from James there from Car Dealer mag. But significantly, I mean, they are eye-watering numbers, aren't they? I mean, Nissan there, in terms of the coronavirus loan scheme, so amounts borrowed, Nissan are in third place there with 600 million borrowing. Inchcape, which is obviously the reference within the story, have borrowed 100 million. Toyota Financial Services UK, 365 million. Mitsubishi Corporation Finance PLC 300 million, Honda Finance Europe PLC 75 million, and Alliance Automotive Investment Limited 20 million. So again, kind of shows some of the borrowings there, and the top one there is BASF at 1 billion in terms of borrowed loans. So it kind of shows some of the pressures that some of these leading manufacturers have at the minute, and looking at the support. So when you say the French government there with Macron giving a
no,
it's kind
a
of
decisive no,
it's maybe something worth thinking about. I suppose it's a bit of an influence, if nothing else, that, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So, something to think about, but worth heading over to. I mean, head over to the BBC, watch the interview with
Yeah.
Ashwani Gupta there, and the story does go into a bit of detail around the crucial talks and China's growth from a Nissan perspective. So and obviously some of the impact on the UK and particularly Sunderland around there. So head over to there, and we've got an and finally this week, haven't we? For
the return of and finally. So it's from Autocar, and they ran an exclusive this week, and it's the inside story of the Dyson EV that never was, and it's a really good piece and definitely worth going online to have a look at. It's an interview that Steve Cropley did probably only last week with James Dyson about what happened to this crossover. It was going to be a £150,000 7-seater EV crossover, and the plans to build it were abandoned last October. So this is the first interview that James Dyson has given since, sort of explaining what happened, and makes it quite clear that it just wasn't commercially viable to go ahead. And it is sad because there was obviously huge investment in it, and it was very much a British project, albeit the car was aimed fairly and squarely at the Chinese market. I think that's where they hope to recoup most of their costs, but it's a sad ending, but looking at the car, nice. It looks really good.
Yeah, good looking car. But I think, like we said right at the start of the show, there it does show the potential intent for this kind of development. I think obviously when they talk about 2.5 billion of personal investment from Britain's richest man, Sir James Dyson, and you've got a ticket price of 150,000 for an electric vehicle, does put in terms of its commercial viability in question, but as we move through time with these kind of things, you can see where it's heading and the potentials with this kind of thing. And I very much doubt, looking at the history of Sir Dyson, that it won't be the last that he has a play with something like this, I suspect.
No, because I mean, that, as you say, huge investment into the project, and I should imagine as a result of that, they've got some really good battery packs that will be of interest to other manufacturers. So if they can salvage that from the project, that will be good, and there must be a lot of interest, because that's really what they brought to the party, their knowledge and expertise in developing rechargeable batteries. But aside from that, it gives quite this story gives quite detailed information on the spec of the car, and what I didn't appreciate was the size of the wheels. They're 24-inch wheels, and they chose to make them that big to give higher ground clearance, to give extra space underneath the cabin floor for the battery pack. So, but it works. They're big wheels, but the proportions do work, and it would have been a 600-mile battery range, and there was something like 5,000 engineers working on this project. And as I say, it was based in the UK at Dyson site in Wiltshire.
No, and as you say, I mean, the R&D won't be to waste, will it? I think there'll be a lot of learnings from this, and sort of what is possible, and whether that somebody else takes it on, or some of the other manufacturers and developments in that sector take some of the learnings and ideas and some of the design planning, then you can see that a worthy time spent for the future development of EVs. I think that's a busy week of headlines this week, and they say this is a proportion of what has been published this week in some of the trade media and some of the national media as well. So I would advise, to keep a check on what's out there. Keep checking online. Lots of stuff happening at the minute, particularly after the 1st of June opening by the dealers, and as people come out of restrictions in certain areas, that a lot happening at the minute and a lot to keep an eye on for changes there in the market.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much it for this week. You've been listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for listening. Do join Philip and I again next weekend, and do look out for the latest in our series of special interviews with industry leaders and analysts, because we'll be doing another one next week. But until then, stay tuned for our special interview with Daksh Gupta, recorded, as we said earlier, on the morning that showrooms reopened in England. And we've got Daksh talking about how the business was managed during the lockdown, and also his views on the likely short, medium and long-term trends for the car retailing sector. So stay tuned for that. But until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him. Hello and welcome from me, Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, to this week's special Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for joining us again for this, in our 11th in a series of special industry leader interviews themed around sharing best practices as car retailers manage their way through COVID-19 crisis. Previous interviews with Sytner Group's Darren Edwards, Virtue Motors Robert Forrester, the IMDA's Umesh Samani, and last week's chat with David Peel, Managing Director of Peugeot UK, are all still available to stream online at motortraderadio.com, Spotify, and Apple and Google Podcasts.
Now, with dealer showrooms reopening across England today, Monday the 1st of June, we're delighted to welcome back an old friend of the podcast, Daksh Gupta, Chief Executive of Marshall Motor Holdings. So welcome back, Daksh, and thanks for joining us. It's already been a busy morning for you, with 117 sites reopening, a live interview with Sky News, and the release of your trading and COVID-19 update. So thanks for taking the time out for the podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. We haven't quite done the Sky News yet, or ITV. That's at 12 o'clock, and then later on this afternoon at 1:30. So, but it has been a busy morning nevertheless. So morning, guys. How you doing?
Yeah, no, we're good, thanks. And that means we've got a scoop, Daksh, if you're talking to the TV networks after us. We don't have a problem with that.
There you go. See, I got my priorities right. Got you guys first. Ahead of ITV. There you go. And we've done the FT this morning and the Guardian as well. So there you go.
Busy.
Now, look, before we talk about the restart, can you just give us a snapshot of what it's been like for you personally to have been running the business from home since the lockdown started 11 weeks ago, and how you've kept in touch with the management team and colleagues across the business?
I would say, I think most people know that I do put the hours in. So my chairman calls me a junkie, as in a work junkie. And I think that's probably a fair description, actually. But I would say what I've gone through in the last 10 weeks makes it look like I've been part-time. It has been very, very, very full on. If people think, we've just been, as a management team, just sort of sat at home with our feet up, it's absolutely the opposite end of what we would normally do in a normal sort of working time of running the business. So typical morning, I'm in the office for about 7:30, which is later than I normally would be. But normally I'm in the office sort of in work time around sort of 6:45, 7. But then I would say most evenings, early part of the week is sort of midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. sometimes, and then it sort of gets a bit better as the week goes on. So it's been very, very busy. I would say in terms of how we've been keeping in communication with our colleagues. So we sort of planned the shutdown the weekend before Boris announced the shutdown on the 23rd. So we called the timing absolutely bang on, and we let our colleagues know on Monday the 23rd of March we were going to shut down. So that's good. So it showed we got our timing right. And then in anticipation of that, we started collecting personal email addresses for all of our colleagues so we could keep in contact with them, which was no mean feat. We had to collect over 4,000 email addresses. So we've been doing 2 videos a week. So there's been 22 videos done so far. which literally started back in February as part of the crisis, and just letting people know what they needed to do in terms of washing their hands, etc. And then as the sort of lockdown period went on, we've been doing 2 a week. So I do one on a Tuesday, which is a kind of state of the nation, what's going on, what we're seeing in the marketplace, what we're seeing with the government, what we know. And then one of my senior team has been doing a video on a Thursday, and we try and make that a bit more relaxed. We have a bit of fun with that. So Richard, our CFO, did an early one, which was kind of his impression of Martin Lewis and telling our colleagues what was available there in terms of financial support from the government. So mortgage extensions, car finance extensions, credit card extensions, etc., etc. And then we've done some music videos as well, which has been quite good fun, and has surprisingly got a huge amount of coverage, actually. So yeah, that's how we've been keeping in contact with people, and the engagement has been absolutely incredible, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, welcome back, Dash. I mean, it's been absolutely great, that you're back on the show, particularly at this time. I mean, we're talking to you on the 1st of June as showrooms have now been allowed to open again. And again, as you've just been saying there, great to watch you throughout lockdown and around the social media. And as you said there, the music video was fantastic. I mean, God knows how many views that's had now, and shares and comments. I mean, you just keep getting notifications one after another. And as you've already mentioned, we've read a trading release this morning, a trading and COVID-19 update. Do you want to talk us through some of the key points of your update this morning?
Yeah, so we did sort of put a release out last Monday, which was just to sort of say that we welcomed the Prime Minister's news to be open. So that was pleasing. And then, but we said we'd provide a more detailed update in due course, which is what today's note was about. I think for us it was basically really sort of focused on a number of things. So first of all, trading prior to lockdown. So we sort of confirmed that the business was doing incredibly well prior to the lockdown period, and we sort of hinted at this in our sort of 10th of March results RNS, which basically talks about the fact that our order bank position was, quote, encouraging. Clearly, with 10 days in of March, our run rate was looking very encouraging indeed. But clearly, with only 10 days of March through, it was hard to sort of see whether you would continue with that momentum, particularly given where we were in terms of COVID at that point in time. But actually, what we were able to share today was how good we were doing. So. Obviously, everybody locked down on the 23rd of March, as we know, and the market at the end of March finished down 31%. Despite that, 31% market down, we were only down. It feels odd saying only because it's still down, but we were only down 10%. So a massive 20.4% outperformance of the market. I mean, that is just unbelievable. Albeit, it kind of, in one sense, it's a fantastic performance because we were 20% ahead of the market, which is phenomenal. Albeit it does feel a little bit sort of weird talking about a bit of a pat on the back, given the fact that we were down, which is understandable given the fact that we shut down in the busiest week of the busiest month. And then we also sort of disclosed the fact that our used car performance was strong. So used was down 9.7. And again, you've got to remember, you always have this month-end spike, as we know, in terms of deliveries. So that was a fantastic performance as well. And then after sales was only down 3%. And again, despite the fact you lost a week's worth of invoicing and business, with total revenues down 6.9%. So actually, you could see, had we had that last week, we would have had a phenomenal performance. So we talked about that. We also talked about what we've been doing in the lockdown period. So we talked about we had 62 of our operations open for key workers, providing sort of emergency provision for key workers, emergency services, breakdowns, vulnerable people. And actually, we did have a skeletal staff taking online inquiries and telephone inquiries. And actually, since the lockdown period, we actually sold unbelievably 3,700 cars through that period. So new retail used in fleet, which was really pleasing. Now, again, fantastic numbers, but again, you've got to put that in the context of, in the same period last year, we sold 19,000. But again, it was pleasing to see that we sold at 3,700, because that will be added to our order bank that, of course, we didn't deliver in March, and clearly we had in for Q2. So yeah, that kind of talked about, they were the kind of key takeouts. And I think from a financial perspective, this was the thing that was really, really pleasing, is our net debt was only 3.2 million as of Friday. So, given the fact we've obviously been taking losses, as every business will have been through April and May, I think to report a net debt position of 3.2 million is very, very pleasing. Recognising we have 120 million of facilities with the banks, which I'll talk about in a second, but of course that 3.2 million has been benefited by working capital inflows, because as our operations have been shut, we've been getting obviously payment for vehicles that ordinarily would be on our balance sheet. And a good example of that would be fleet. So we typically carry around 12 million of fleet debt as those vehicles have been delivered, and as those vehicles were due for payment, we've obviously had the cash inflows for that. But as we ramp up the business, those fleet debtors will go. So obviously that will then start to consume working capital. So fantastic performance on the financial side. And actually the other thing we were pleased to sort of highlight as well is the fact that actually we've been in discussion with our banks, as I'm sure many companies will be, and they've been very supportive, and we're in the late stages of finalising our 120 million RCF. So they're the kind of key takeouts of this morning's release, really.
Now, Dash, as you mentioned, the lockdown started in what is traditionally the busiest week of the year, also in the busiest month of the year. Can you tell us what impacts that had on fulfilling outstanding new car orders, and also how you're restarting the new car sales process from today? And I guess especially with factories just restarting production, what will be the challenges around getting stock for new orders?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic, and quite frankly, nobody knows the answer, Curtis. I mean, anybody who's... I think you can make judgments, which is ultimately what we're paid to do. I have to say we've been working really closely with our manufacturer partners, who I have to say have been fantastically supportive. And it's interesting, I was talking to Darren Edwards this morning, who obviously and one thing Darren and I were just sort of saying this morning, it's been fantastic how the whole industry's pulled together and worked together and cooperated to make sure that we're doing the right things for the country, for our industry, for our manufacturer partners, and indeed our own businesses. So I think what we're seeing is supply on new cars it could be challenged given the fact that the factories have been shut. That said, we clearly have a lot of build-up of stock already in the pipeline, which we would typically have in terms of consignment stock. We also clearly have an order bank that would have ordinarily been delivered in March. And I think, as you can see with our trading performance, we were absolutely flying. So we will have an order bank from the shutdown period, which would have gone in the last week of March, plus the order bank for Q2 that will be delivered. Of course, one thing that we have seen, which is understandable, is we've seen cancellations, which is understandable. Again, we're just trying to understand, how much of that order bank remains, but certainly so far, we're reasonably encouraged what we've seen on that order bank. And then clearly, as I said earlier, we sold 3,700 cars. I think what we'll see is new car supply might be challenging, particularly around EV. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, because typically when supply is tight on new, you typically tend to see margins increase on new cars, and we've seen this before with when we went through the WLTP period. What we are also seeing is new car sales are generally down. It's hard to judge why that is. But certainly at the minute, I think new car sales are down, and it'll be interesting to see where May pans out. My sort of early indications are May will probably be down somewhere around 85%. But you've also got to understand we've only had a few days of being able to do click and collect services. So June will be a good barometer, as will July, August, and September. Albeit September could be distorted, because I would expect to see a significant spike up in volumes, given the fact that a lot of customers who would have bought their vehicles in Q2 haven't had that opportunity. So it's, you've got lots of ups and downs, lots of dynamics in there. You could see used cars appreciate. I mean, I know people have been talking about used cars being under pressure. Actually, what we're seeing, and I know a lot of other people are seeing, is actually used cars in some cases are going up. Because obviously we've had a period where we've been selling a load of cars but not being able to deliver them. So you have got a shortage of stock out there generally, and you won't have the new cars generating those part exchanges. So, and then of course the final dynamic, just if that wasn't easy enough to try and predict, you also then have an underlying economy which says, well, okay, if people are concerned about their jobs, given the economic outlook out there, will people want to come out and spend? And that's probably the hardest thing to judge, is what's the underlying demand in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's going to be. I mean, there's so many sort of unknowns at the minute, like you say, and the new car market wasn't exactly massively buoyant for the last sort of 18 months with things like you mentioned with WLTP and RDE and things like that taking place. But, I think it's, as you say, I think it's positive for used cars. If the new car market is a challenge, then opportunities there in the used car space. But thinking about the showrooms, Dash, I mean, obviously, we talk about the showrooms being closed since the 23rd of March. You've got 62 after-sales operations that remained open for essential workers, emergency workers, and vans, etc. As you've noted there. Did these perform? How did these perform during lockdown, and what's this sort of last week as sort of things have started to reopen again look like? I mean, is it been a really positive move as it started to reopen?
Yeah, I mean, we brought our people back on the 18th of May in terms of management. So prior to sort of the 18th of May, we had around 400 people in, which is around 12 or 13% of the colleague base. We then brought, once we on the Wednesday, we saw that click and collect services were okay to do. We then obviously recognised the fact that we'd sold obviously a significant amount of cars through lockdown, and we had the order bank to go through. So we decided to bring back colleagues on the first Monday thereafter. So we had about 300 people back, and then we were starting to open up our operations, in fact, last week for after sales, which of course you could always do. And then with this sort of management population to organise deliveries, we sort of got some momentum behind it. And then literally last Tuesday, we brought back more technicians. All of our operations were sort of starting to ramp up again. And in terms of demand, I mean, last Tuesday we had 1,828 people in, so about 44% of our colleagues. And last week was busy. So after sales has been very encouraging. I mean, we're nowhere near, again, just to manage expectations, we're nowhere near where we clearly were last year. But certainly last week's levels have been encouraging, and that we are seeing a significant ramp up of activity. So on Friday we were at around about sort of 60-70% of what we would normally be. But of course, it's only 4 days of trading. My instinct says, I think given there'll be a lot of news coverage and news flow on the fact that car showrooms are open, I think people will naturally watch the news and think, I can now go and get my car serviced. So I suspect this week will be busier. From a sales perspective, it was busy. I'm going to say it was pleasantly busy. I mean, we sold over 200 cars on our second day of opening and on our third day of opening. So that was really, really pleasing, But again, what we don't know is how much of this is pent-up demand and what's the underlying trading going to look like.
Now, Dash, you've talked about click and collect, and throughout the lockdown, we know online activity amongst buyers has been very high as they've searched for new and used cars. I'm just wondering how you see online car buying services evolving after the lockdown is lifted.
It's really interesting. I've been, it's my 28th year in the industry, albeit I like to point out I'm not quite 50 yet. But the interesting thing is I've heard for 20 years now, online's going to kill your business. Online's going to kill your business. Manufacturers are going to go direct and go online. I've been hearing that for years, as I'm sure you guys would have been. If ever there was an opportunity to try and prove and make that work, it was from the 23rd of March, because suddenly the whole supply chain stopped. And we, along with a lot of other retailers and along with our manufacturer partners, tried to see if there were ways of being able to do this. And the reality is, it's just very difficult to do. It's very difficult to deliver a car when you've got to provide some sort of experience. It's an emotional purchase. Cars are not essential. People buy them because it's an emotional purchase. So I think what it's proven to me is our model. I always believed our model was safe before, but I think it's even more safe now, because we've proved that it's very, very difficult to execute delivering and selling cars, through online methods. Because yes, you can fulfill the first part of it, which is this sort of quote click part of it through online and telephone. The challenge, of course, when it comes down to the collect part of it, because someone's got to invoice the car, someone's got to do an FCA process, someone's got to do a handover, someone's got to clean the vehicle, and as soon as you put that infrastructure in, the economics of being able to do that are quite challenging. And of course, also customers still like to come and see a vehicle and feel, touch, drive, smell. Hence why we have showrooms. So I don't necessarily subscribe to. I think you will see an amount of people who will say, actually, this is fine, but I don't think it's materially going to change from what we've seen. And I was looking at a stat the other day which said in the US, which I think we would all accept is the most mature market in the world for online platforms, actually still in the US less than 1% of cars are transacted online completely, less than 1%. And the internet's been there, 25 to 30 years, I guess. So, I don't totally subscribe to the theory that, we're all suddenly going to shift towards online purchasing more than we've seen before. You might see a little bit of an uptick to it, but I'm not totally convinced it's going to be, sort of 25% or anything like that. Certainly not in the short to medium term.
Do you think it's tested some of the e-commerce digital propositions that the retail network and the OEMs have got then? Do you think that's really what this has done, has really sort of put a bit of a test in place for people's systems and highlighted those that haven't got a comprehensive system to those that have?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'll give you a little example. We had the ability for you to buy a vehicle online about 5 years ago, because everybody was saying this is the way it's going to go, this is the way it was going to go. And I think we sold less than 20 cars on it. In fact, it's more expensive having the facility to have the ability to transact online than the vehicles we were selling in terms of profit. So we actually took it off because there just was no demand there. And the fact that we've been, and by the way, we still don't have that facility on our website, which we are just about to launch it imminently as it happens. But guess what? We still sold 3,700 cars. We still sold 3,700 cars in the lockdown period. Why? Because customers like to do their research and they still want to connect and have that conversation with somebody, So we will have the ability to do that. I mean, you can reserve cars online, but I still think it is almost like a marketing tool, our website, to showcase our products on our used cars. The manufacturer websites clearly are showcasing their products, and then ultimately the consumer is wanting to talk to somebody in terms of what their options are, what the delivery times are, what their part exchange is worth, how does financing work. So I think we've all sharpened up our websites, etc., and looked at every single opportunity that's out there. But I certainly think it's going to be an evolution, as of course we've seen in the UK for the last 20 plus years.
Yeah.
Now, Dash, what's your view? I mean, there's been lots of talk over recent weeks about the possibility of a scrappage scheme. I'd be interested in what your view is on whether the UK car retailing sector actually needs a government-backed market stimulus package like a scrappage scheme, or do you think this is something that can be led by the industry itself? For example, OEMs using captive finance.
I think that the industry is at a real crossroads now. I think we already were seeing the industry, particularly for our brand partners, facing a number of challenges, principally led by the biggest strategic challenge that we all face, which is around climate change and them having to hit quite stringent emissions targets. And whilst many manufacturers I know were on track to achieve 2020 emissions targets, actually, some weren't, but I think the bigger challenge is, you might be able to hit 2020, but will you be able to hit the step down in 2025? So that clearly is an issue, and if you've got fines that are going to make the situation worse for our manufacturers at a time when basically, they've clearly seen a significant dent in their financial results because of COVID, because they've just not been able to deliver vehicles. That's going to put them under significant pressure. So, this is one of the biggest sectors in the, it's the biggest sectors in the world. And if you look at the UK, was it 823,000 people that work in this sector out of a 26.5 million workforce? So the automotive industry is a material part of the UK and global economy. It provides a significant number of jobs. And I think the reality is that it's going to be a challenging time for them to be able to stimulate the market themselves. I would hope that the government recognise this. I think, generally the government have done a pretty good job, I think, of trying to protect the economy. And I think, the work that Mike Halls at the SMMT and Sue Robinson at the NFDA were doing there's been a joint working party with those two organisations, which I think is a really good thing. So well done to Sue and Mike for being able to enable that to happen, because ultimately manufacturers and retailers' interests are aligned. We all want the same thing: sell loads of cars, parts and hours, and make sure our customers are happy. You have the occasional pressure that comes in on things like target negotiations, investment levels, but by and large we actually are aligned 99 times out of 100. I think if Sue and Mike and everybody can get behind some sort of stimulus from the government, be that scrappage or be that some sort of grant, then I think that's a good thing. And you will have seen last night the German government are talking about some sort of grant system there. I think a grant thing, some sort of grant would be better in my view, because scrappage doesn't necessarily benefit every single manufacturer. So, scrappage clearly benefited certain manufacturers in the last, post the financial crisis. But, we didn't see many customers, part exchanging their older vehicles for, say, Range Rovers. So is that necessarily fair for Jaguar Land Rover? Probably not. So therefore, I think a fairer scheme to stimulate all manufacturers across all of the sectors would be some sorts of grants, but that's just my personal view.
No, it's a good point. It is a very good point. Like you say, the last scrappage scheme did, like you say, enhance certain manufacturers' market share at the time, because it was focused on a certain area of the market and not others. So, no, I'd agree with that one. So, in terms of these totally, as the overused word, unprecedented times, from a CEO's perspective, what do you think are some of the key learnings from this experience, other than having 10 barbecues before June? And congratulations, by the way, on AJ's 21st birthday as well during this lockdown period. And the other benchmarks that you've got, because I think you probably had one of the biggest webinar conference colleagues calls on record. I think God knows how many people you did have on one of your colleague calls. But are there any key learnings that you think your key takeaways from this experience that we've been through as a CEO?
I think a couple of things. One, I think it's been fantastic to see the sort of team spirit across all of the CEOs across the dealer groups. The camaraderie with our manufacturers has been fantastic, and also the spirit of our people. Isn't it funny? It's funny. I'm in Cambridge Jaguar Land Rover at the minute, and woke up this morning, couldn't remember how to do my tie actually. But I think I've gone around all the businesses, and we've got sort of 6 franchises here, and it's great. People are smiling, they're happy to be back. And isn't it funny? Normally when we're at work, we're all sort of, can't wait to retire, can't wait to go for the weekend. And actually, I think what people have realised through this period is actually the camaraderie and the friendships and the relationships that you have through your working life. Work is an important part for people. It's not just about providing an income to be able to live. I think as human beings, I think you need that sort of social interaction on a day-by-day basis. So I think that's really important, and I think people throughout this whole period will make their own conclusions. And I think my sort of thought would be is just how we act with other people and how we behave with other people is the sort of thing I would say people should consider. And how you behave and how you treat other people, it's really made me think a lot about what we do at Marshall and how we operate as a business. And I think we've always had a fantastic culture. You would have seen in the lockdown period, we also celebrated a 10th year on Great Place to Work, 6 years running now in the best UK workplaces. So I think we've always been very, very good at looking after our people. And I think the lockdown period has really got our people even closer. And that sort of communication piece is really important. But it's what impact do I have as a leader on my business and for my people? I think it's really important. And that conference we had last week, we had 359 people logging in, but we understand there was probably about 450 people who had actually dialed in to have that conference. And we'll be doing another one on next week on the 11th of June as well, just so we can keep the guys focused on what they need to do.
And do you think it's clearly demonstrated this, where you've given so much to your colleagues, your people, haven't you, over the years? As you say, it's constant. Do you think this has been where they've given back? Do you think this has clearly been? I mean, they've always given back, haven't they? But do you think this is really, as a business, do you think it's really shown the benefit of the close working relationship and being the best employer and things like this in the industry? Do you think this is clearly now their time that they've really given back to you and their
100%. I mean, we've been very generous compared to what we know elsewhere is happening in the sector. So elsewhere, we know there's wholesale redundancies going on. I think that's quite well known in many other businesses. Elsewhere, people have applied the £2,500 cap through the lockdown period. Elsewhere, they're just passing through 80%. Some companies didn't even pass through sales commissions because it wasn't clear that you could definitely get it. So it was a bit of a risk. There's no doubt about that. But so we looked after our people. We paid them 100% in March. We supported them in April with 90%, 85% in May, and we didn't have a cap either. So there is we have 120 plus million payroll. So from that perspective, to do those little things on a small percentage is a big number. You can work it out. It's 7 figures plus. Multi-7 figures plus. So I think my view very simply is this company has been successful because of the fantastic people we've got working in the organisation. So at a time when our people needed the company's help, the company was there. I've got to say, the board and the shareholders, I wondered whether I might get a few eyebrows raised from shareholders. In fact, quite the opposite. The shareholders were fantastic, said you've done absolutely the right thing to support your people because you'll get this back in spades, and I completely agree. And then, by the way, that wasn't the reason we did it. We did it because it was absolutely the right thing. And as I said, the company's been successful because of the fantastic ethos and work ethic and culture we have in the organisation. Our people needed the company's help. The company was there for them, and now we're opening up. The company needs their help to maximise every opportunity so that the company can be here, for the next 110 years. And I'm very confident that with the culture we've got and the people we've got, we're going to get through. And I think when you look at the financial position we are as a business as well, we're going to be one of the winners in the long term, no question.
And finally, Dash, and you might need your crystal ball for this one. With showrooms reopening from today, what are your expectations for the car retailing sector in the short, medium, and long term?
I think we've all talked about consolidation for years and years and years and years, and I've been a big believer that you're going to see the number of outlets reduced by probably 20 to 25% over the next 5, 6, 7 years. I think what COVID-19 will do is I think that will accelerate that consolidation to the next 2 years. I think we'll see some dealerships just simply won't come back. And we've already seen some examples of that in the press, which is a real shame for those people who are affected. So I think this is going to accelerate what probably was coming anyway. And I personally believe in 5, 6, 7 years' time, we'll look back and the COVID crisis will be the catalyst that has effectively driven a significant landscape change. And what I believe will happen, there'll be probably 5, 6 super groups out there with revenues of between 5 and 10 billion. And I do believe we'll see the first 10 billion turnover group in the next 5 to 7 years, I believe.
And will you be one of those super groups?
Yes, 100% will be one of those super groups.
Yep.
No question.
Yeah, wouldn't have said it if not.
I thought you'd say that.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic, Dash. And I mean, all it leaves me to say is thank you again for coming on and for sharing your thoughts and some great observations there throughout that. And I think the early days on the return to some kind of new normality, but I think it's clearly demonstrated that your people are up for it, the business is up for it, and you certainly are. You are certainly up for it. I think you've probably had enough barbecues now for the remainder of the year. I think you're probably barbecued out now, aren't you? I suspect. And
I can't be a barbecue. My wife's grateful. My kids are grateful. So, and it's my contribution towards doing the house stuff. So there we go.
No, it's great. It's great to have you on, Dash, from a personal.
Yeah, guys, good to talk, and well done for the job you guys have done. I think one of the observations I've made is a number of people, such as yourself, have done a really good job of keeping colleagues who are furloughed engaged and understanding what's going on. So congratulations for the work that you guys have done as well. It's not unnoticed, I'm sure, within the sector. So well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, many thanks for joining us, Dash, and good luck to you and the Marshall team for a successful restart. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for now. You've been listening to this special Motor Trade Radio podcast brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Please like and share on social media, as it's important during these times for the dealer community to work together and share experiences and best practices. Many thanks to you for listening and supporting the podcast. Philip and I will be back with the industry headlines on Saturday, but do watch out for more special podcast interviews as we work through this crisis. So until next time, stay safe and stay well, and good luck with the start from Philip and I.